What would you do if a group of armed men cornered you at a gas station in the middle of nowhere? Most people would panic, run, or surrender. But for Ethan Walker, surrender isn't in his vocabulary, and what happens next will leave you speechless. The sun had barely risen over the quiet highway, casting long shadows across a dusty gas station in the middle of nowhere. A lone man stood by the pump, his rugged frame exuding a quiet strength. To the casual observer, he looked like just another traveler passing through, but the truth was far from ordinary. Unbeknownst to the group of bandits who pulled into the station moments later, this wasn't just any man. This was Ethan Walker, a retired Marine with a past steeped in combat and survival. Years of service had honed his instincts and reflexes to razor-sharp precision. But he'd long since traded the battlefield for a peaceful life on the open road. "Hey, old man," one of the bandits sneered, stepping out of a beat-up truck with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Got some spare cash for a couple of thirsty travelers?" The bandits laughed as they circled Ethan, their eyes filled with malice. What they didn't realize was that the quiet, unassuming man in front of them wasn't one to be underestimated. In the stillness that followed, Ethan's hand tightened subtly around his gas pump, his mind already calculating options. The bandits thought they had found an easy target, but they were about to learn a lesson the hard way. Never judge a book by its cover. The gas station sat at the crossroads of two forgotten highways, a relic from another era. Its peeling paint, rusted signage, and creaky fuel pumps stood as silent witnesses to countless stories of travelers passing through. Today, however, the stage was set for a different kind of story, one that would be whispered about long after the dust settled. Ethan Walker parked his motorcycle next to pump number 2, its chrome glinting faintly in the early morning sun. The leather saddlebags, worn from years of travel, carried everything he needed: a few clothes, tools, and a weathered photo of his late wife tucked into a hidden pocket. To him, this journey wasn't just about seeing the country. It was a way to find peace after years of chaos. His eyes, sharp and alert beneath the brim of his cap, scanned the desolate surroundings. The gas station attendant, a young man with earbuds in and a bored expression, leaned against the counter inside. The place was empty save for an elderly couple parked under the shade of a nearby tree, munching on sandwiches. Ethan liked it that way. Quiet, unassuming, but the peace didn't last. The low rumble of an approaching vehicle broke the silence, growing louder until a dusty truck screeched into the station. Its bed was piled with tools and junk, and 3 men jumped out, their boots crunching against the gravel. They wore denim jackets and bandanas, tattoos snaking up their arms. One carried a crowbar slung casually over his shoulder, while another flicked a lighter on and off in a nervous rhythm. Ethan's instincts kicked in immediately. He kept his movements slow, nonchalant, as he resumed fueling his bike. But his mind raced, cataloguing details. The way the man with the crowbar seemed to be the leader, the tension in their body language, the way they scanned the area for witnesses. "Hey, old man," the leader called out, sauntering over with a smug grin. "Got any spare cash? Looks like you're riding pretty fancy there. Bet you got some to share." Ethan turned his head slightly, his face calm, almost bored. "Just passing through," he said, his voice steady. "Not looking for trouble." "Well, trouble's looking for you," the man sneered, stepping closer. His 2 friends spread out, one idly inspecting Ethan's bike while the other lingered near the gas station entrance. The attendant inside, oblivious to the brewing tension, tapped away on his phone. Ethan sighed inwardly. He'd hoped for a quiet morning, but life had a way of throwing curveballs when he least expected them. "Look, fellas," he said, setting the pump back in its holder. "I don't want any problems. Why don't you move on and let me finish here?" The leader's grin widened. "Not so fast, Grandpa. We're just getting started." The man by the bike kicked the front tire lightly, testing its reaction. "Nice ride," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Bet it'd fetch a good price." Ethan's jaw tightened, though his expression remained calm. "You don't want to do that," he warned, his tone low and measured. The leader laughed, turning to his friends. "Oh, you hear that? He's giving us advice now. What are you, some kind of tough guy?" Ethan didn't respond. His silence, coupled with the faintest hint of a smirk, seemed to irritate the man. "I asked you a question," the leader barked, stepping forward and jabbing a finger into Ethan's chest. That was the moment the air changed. Ethan's eyes, once calm and distant, sharpened into a piercing gaze that froze the leader mid-motion. The shift was subtle yet unmistakable. The quiet man was no longer just a traveler minding his own business. Behind them, the elderly couple had noticed the commotion and quickly drove off, and their sandwiches forgotten. Inside, the gas station attendant finally looked up, his eyes widening as he realized what was happening. The man by the bike reached for the saddlebags, his hand brushing the leather. "I'd leave that alone if I were you," Ethan said, his voice even but carrying a weight that made the man hesitate. "What? This?" the man replied, pulling at the strap mockingly. Ethan moved then, not quickly but with deliberate purpose. He stepped forward, his hand snapping out to grip the man's wrist. The strength in his grasp was unexpected, and the man yelped, dropping the bag as Ethan released him just as swiftly. The leader stepped back, his grin faltering. "You've got some nerve, old man," he growled, gripping the crowbar tighter. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And you've got poor judgment." The tension thickened, the quiet morning now crackling with the promise of a storm. Ethan knew there was no avoiding what came next, but he also knew one thing for certain. These men had no idea what they were about to face. The leader, still gripping the crowbar, glared at Ethan with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think you're some kind of tough guy, huh?" he spat, taking a threatening step forward. His companions exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the shift in dynamics. Ethan, calm and unmoving, simply returned the gaze, his expression unreadable. The air seemed heavier now, the faint hum of the gas pumps drowned out by the escalating tension. Ethan slowly reached into his back pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, wiping his hands as if the situation bored him. The deliberate, unhurried motion made the leader's bravado waver for a brief moment. "Listen," Ethan said finally, his voice low but firm. "This can go one of two ways. You can walk away, get in your truck, and drive off. Or," he let the word hang in the air, his piercing gaze locking on the leader's, "you can find out just how bad of a day you've chosen to have." The leader barked a laugh, but it lacked conviction. "Big words for an old man," he sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. "How you don't scare me." Behind him, one of his men, the one with the lighter, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should go, Red," he muttered, glancing at Ethan. "This guy ain't normal." Red, if that was the leader's name, whirled on his companion, his face twisted in fury. "Shut it, Mick. We're not leaving with our tails between our legs because of some washed-up biker." Mick didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. The third man, still lingering near the gas station door, looked equally uncertain. His fingers twitched nervously at his sides, his bravado eroded by Ethan's unflinching demeanor. Ethan decided to press the advantage. "You're smart to listen to your friend," he said, his tone carrying the weight of experience. "He's got better instincts than you do." Red snapped his head back toward Ethan, his grip tightening on the crowbar. "I've had enough of your mouth," he snarled, taking another step forward. "Let's see if you're as tough as you think you are." Before he could act, Ethan raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. The motion wasn't threatening. It was authoritative, commanding attention. "I've seen men like you before," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Bullies who think strength comes from the size of their weapon or the fear they can inspire. But real strength—" He paused, his gaze sweeping over the three men. "Real strength doesn't need to be announced." Red hesitated, his knuckles white as he gripped the crowbar. For a moment it seemed like he might back down, but then he sneered, gesturing toward Ethan's bike. "Yeah? Well, let's see how strong you are when that fancy ride of yours is in pieces." Ethan's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The move was so sudden and deliberate that Red flinched, caught off guard. Ethan's voice dropped to a cold, quiet tone that sent chills through the men. "Touch that bike," he said, "and I promise you'll regret it." The threat wasn't loud. It wasn't even overt. But the weight behind it, the sheer confidence in Ethan's words, was enough to freeze Red in place. For a moment, the only sound was the distant chirping of crickets and the soft breeze rustling through the nearby trees. The gas station attendant, now fully aware of the brewing confrontation, ducked behind the counter and reached for his phone. He fumbled with it, debating whether to call the police, but something in Ethan's demeanor made him pause. This wasn't the kind of situation that the local sheriff would fix. It felt like something bigger. Mick took a step back, his voice shaky as he addressed Red. "Red, seriously, let's just go. This guy's not worth it." But Red's pride was a stubborn thing. He turned to his companions, growling, "If you two are too scared to back me up, fine. But I'm not letting this punk talk to me like that." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're not leaving yourself much of a choice," he said. "Walk away now, and we all go on with our day." "Push it, and you'll learn why some men shouldn't be messed with." Red lunged. The move was clumsy, fueled more by anger than strategy. Ethan sidestepped with ease, his hand shooting out to grab Red's wrist. In one fluid motion, he twisted the crowbar free and tossed it aside. The heavy metal clanging against the pavement, Red staggered back, clutching his wrist in pain and glaring at Ethan with a mixture of rage and fear. "You'll pay for that," he growled, but the bravado was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, watching the men carefully. It was clear now that he wasn't just some random traveler. There was something in the way he moved, the way he carried himself, that hinted at years of training and discipline. The other two men looked at each other, then at Red. Mick finally shook his head. "This ain't worth it," he muttered, stepping back toward the truck. Red opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. Ethan took a step forward, his presence alone enough to make Red stumble back. "You've got one last chance," Ethan said. "Take it." As Mick and the other man hesitated near the truck, a sudden change in the atmosphere rippled through the gas station. The faint rumble of an approaching vehicle grew louder, echoing off the empty road like a storm brewing on the horizon. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the sound, his senses instantly heightened. Something told him this wasn't over. A black pickup truck, older but well-maintained, rolled into the gas station at a deliberate pace. Its headlights cast sharp beams across the pavement, slicing through the dim light of the station's overhead lamps. The truck came to a stop a few yards from the pumps, its engine growling like a restless beast. Ethan observed as two more men climbed out of the truck. They moved with a purpose, their boots crunching against the gravel. Both were taller and more solidly built than Red's crew, their faces hardened by years of confrontation. One of them, a bald man with a jagged scar running from his temple to his chin, scanned the scene with cold, calculating eyes. Red's expression shifted from anger to relief. "About time you showed up," he said, rubbing his wrist as he gestured toward Ethan. "This guy's been giving us trouble." The scarred man ignored Red's complaint, his sharp gaze locking onto Ethan. He walked closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate, as if measuring his opponent. "So you're the one causing problems for my boys?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Ethan didn't flinch. His stance remained relaxed, but his mind was already working through the situation. He could see it now. This man wasn't just another thug. He was the one in charge, the one pulling the strings. "I'd say it's the other way around," Ethan replied evenly, his tone calm but unyielding. "Your boys thought they could throw their weight around. I just reminded them that actions have consequences." The scarred man smirked, but there was no humor in it. He nodded toward the crowbar lying on the ground. "Red, you really let him take that from you?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. "What kind of message does that send?" Red bristled, his pride wounded. "He caught me off guard," he muttered, avoiding the scarred man's gaze. The man turned his attention back to Ethan, his smirk fading into a hard line. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, "but this isn't your fight. You're just passing through, right? Do yourself a favor and keep it that way." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I don't walk away from bullies," he said, his voice steady, "especially when they threaten people who can't defend themselves." The scarred man tilted his head, studying Ethan as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "You're either brave or stupid," he said finally, "but I'll give you credit. You've got guts. Most people wouldn't stand up to us." "I'm not most people," Ethan replied, his green eyes sharp and unwavering. For a moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension crackling like static electricity. The scarred man's hand drifted to his belt, where a large hunting knife hung in a leather sheath. He didn't draw it, but the gesture was enough to send a clear message. Ethan didn't blink. His body language remained calm, but his muscles were coiled, ready to spring into action if necessary. He noticed Mick and the other man inching closer to the truck, their earlier bravado now replaced with apprehension. The scarred man finally broke the silence. "You've got fight in you," he said, almost admiringly. "But let me make one thing clear, this is my territory. You don't just stroll in and make a fool out of my crew without consequences. Maybe it's time someone did, Ethan shot back, his voice like steel. You've had your way with this place long enough. The scarred man's smirk returned, but this time it was darker, more menacing. You've got no idea who you're messing with, do you? He asked. I've seen your type before, thinking you can ride in on your bike and play hero. But you're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of your league. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Numbers don't win fights, he said. Skill does. And I've got more of that than you'll ever know. The scarred man narrowed his eyes, clearly not used to being challenged. We'll see about that, he growled. He turned to his men, barking orders. Mick, Tank, get in the truck. We'll handle this the way we always do. Red hesitated, glancing between Ethan and his boss. What about him? He asked, nodding toward Ethan. The scarred man glanced back at Ethan, his expression cold. Leave him for now, he said. He'll learn the hard way not to mess with us. As the truck roared to life and the men piled in, Ethan remained rooted in place, his gaze fixed on the retreating vehicle. He knew this wasn't over. The scarred man's parting words weren't just a warning, they were a promise. The attendant peeked out from behind the counter, his face pale. You think they'll come back? He asked nervously. Ethan turned, his expression unreadable. Count on it, he said. And when they do, I'll be ready. The black pickup truck disappeared into the night, its rumbling engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood still for a moment, letting the cool desert air settle around him. The gas station returned to its eerie quiet, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the soft chirping of crickets. Inside the gas station, the young attendant, visibly shaken, stepped cautiously from behind the counter. His wide eyes darted toward Ethan, reflecting both fear and a glimmer of hope. You think they'll really come back? He asked, his voice trembling. Ethan finally turned to face him, his expression calm but firm. People like that don't back down easily. They're used to controlling everything through fear. When someone stands up to them, it rattles them, and that makes them unpredictable. The attendant nodded slowly, his hands fidgeting nervously. I've never seen anyone do what you did. Most people just... He trailed off, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. Ethan's gaze softened slightly. Most people don't have the training I do, he said. But standing up to bullies isn't about skill. It's about knowing what's right and refusing to back down. The young man swallowed hard, clearly struggling to process everything that had happened. Should I call the cops? He asked. Ethan shook his head. They'd be gone by the time anyone got here. And even if they weren't, those guys know how to slip through the cracks. The law doesn't scare them. So what do we do? The attendant asked, his voice rising with panic. They'll come back and they'll be angry. Ethan leaned against the counter, his demeanor steady and composed. First, you're going to lock up and head home, make sure your family's safe. Second, you're going to trust me to handle this. You. The attendant looked at him skeptically, though there was a faint spark of admiration in his eyes. What can you do against all of them? Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Enough, he said simply. Before the attendant could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the stillness. Both men tensed, their eyes snapping toward the station's entrance. Relief washed over the attendant's face as he recognized an older man stepping out of a battered sedan. Dad, the attendant said, rushing to the door. The older man, whose name tag identified him as Sam, entered with a cautious glance toward Ethan. He was tall and lean, with hands calloused from years of hard labor. What's going on here, Michael? He asked, his tone laced with concern. Michael gestured toward Ethan. This guy, he stopped some bikers from causing trouble. But they'll be back, Dad. I just know it. Sam turned to Ethan, his eyes narrowing. You don't look like someone who's here for a peaceful road trip, he said, his voice steady but wary. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. Just passing through, he replied. But when I see people like those bikers throwing their weight around, I can't ignore it. Sam studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Well, I appreciate what you did for my boy. Those thugs have been pushing folks around for months now, making threats, taking money. Most of us just keep our heads down and hope they move on. Ethan's expression hardened. They don't just move on. People like that keep taking until someone makes them stop. Sam sighed, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "And how exactly do you plan to make them stop?" he asked. "There's only one of you and a lot of them." Ethan's voice was calm, but carried an undeniable edge. "I've dealt with worse odds." Sam's eyes flicked to the scars on Ethan's forearms and the way he carried himself, as if every movement was calculated. "You're military, aren't you?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Army Ranger." Sam exhaled sharply, a mix of respect and worry crossing his face. "Well, Ranger, I hope you know what you're doing. These guys aren't just random punks. They've got connections, people who won't like it if you start making waves." "I've been making waves my whole life," Ethan replied. Michael stepped forward, his earlier fear giving way to resolve. "What can I do to help?" he asked, his voice steady for the first time since the encounter began. Ethan glanced at him, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Lock up the station and stay out of sight. If they come back tonight, I'll handle it. But you'll need to be ready for tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Michael asked, confused. Ethan's gaze swept over the quiet gas station and the dark road stretching into the distance. "They'll want to send a message," he said. "But so will I." Sam and Michael exchanged a glance, uncertainty etched on their faces. But there was something about Ethan, his calm demeanor, his unwavering confidence, that made them believe he could pull off the impossible. "All right," Sam said finally. "We'll trust you." Ethan nodded and stepped out into the night, his silhouette cutting a striking figure under the flickering lights. The stillness of the desert wrapped around him, but his mind was anything but quiet. He knew the real fight was just beginning, and he would need every ounce of his training to see it through. As the gas station's lights dimmed and the last customer's car pulled away into the darkness, Ethan remained outside, scanning the vast expanse of desert road. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, but his mind was a battlefield of calculated strategies. He didn't have the luxury of underestimating his opponents. These weren't ordinary troublemakers. They were organized, and their intent went far beyond petty intimidation. Inside the gas station, Michael locked the doors as instructed, glancing nervously toward his father. "Sam, Dad, do you really think he can stop them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam exhaled deeply, his gaze fixed on Ethan, standing immovable under the flickering light. "I don't know, son," he admitted, "but I know this. He's the first person I've seen who's not afraid to try." Michael nodded slowly, but doubt lingered in his eyes. "And what if trying isn't enough?" Outside, Ethan's sharp hearing picked up the faint, distant growl of engines. His eyes narrowed as he turned toward the road. The sound grew louder, rumbling like an approaching storm. They were coming. The headlights appeared first, cutting through the darkness like twin blades. Then came the hulking silhouettes of motorcycles, their riders clad in leather jackets, adorned with patches that marked their allegiance to a notorious gang known as the Iron Wolves. Ethan counted 5 bikes, each one roaring with defiance as they slowed to a stop at the edge of the gas station's lot. From the middle of the pack, a tall, broad-shouldered man dismounted. His jacket bore a patch that read Alpha, and his presence radiated authority. This was no mere henchman, this was their leader. Behind him, the other riders followed suit, their movements calculated and synchronized. These men weren't amateurs. The leader's piercing gaze locked onto Ethan, who stood unflinching in the pool of light from the gas station's sign. "You're the one who stepped out of line earlier," the leader called out, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I didn't step out of line," he replied. "I just drew one you shouldn't cross." The leader smirked, his white teeth gleaming under the dim light. "Cute," he said, "but you see, this place, it's ours now. That means everyone here pays their dues, including you." Ethan's voice remained calm, but his words carried weight. "I don't pay bullies." The gang's second in command, a wiry man with a snake tattoo winding around his neck, stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of a large knife sheathed at his side. "You've got a lot of nerve for a dead man walking," he sneered. Ethan's eyes flicked toward him, his body language still relaxed but ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. "You sure you want to find out how much nerve I've got?" he said, his voice low and steady. The leader raised a hand, signaling his men to hold back. "Not yet," he said, his tone laced with authority. "Let's not waste good muscle on a hothead." Turning his attention back to Ethan, the leader's smirk widened. You think you're doing this town a favor, don't you? Standing up to the big bad wolves. But you've got no idea who you're messing with. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You're right, he said. I don't know you, and you don't know me. But let me make one thing clear. I've dealt with bigger threats than you in places far worse than this. The leader's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a laugh. Is that supposed to scare me? It's not a warning, Ethan said, his voice cold and deliberate. It's a promise. The gang leader's amusement evaporated, replaced by a hard, calculating expression. All right, soldier boy, he said, his tone now icy. You want to play hero? Let's see how far that gets you. With a sharp motion, he turned to his men. Let's send him a message. Tear this place apart. The gang members surged forward, their boots pounding against the pavement as they approached the gas station. Inside, Michael and Sam watched in horror as the iron wolves began smashing windows and kicking over displays. One rider struck the gas pumps with a crowbar, sending sparks flying. Dad, we have to stop them, Michael said, panic rising in his voice. Stay back, Sam ordered, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. He told us to trust him. Outside, Ethan moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the chaos. He could see the gang's weak points, their overconfidence, their lack of discipline. These weren't warriors. They were opportunists hiding behind bravado. As one of the bikers turned to swing his crowbar at a pump, Ethan moved. He closed the distance in seconds, his fist connecting with the man's jaw in a single, devastating strike. The biker crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the pavement. The remaining riders hesitated, momentarily stunned by Ethan's speed and precision. Who's next? Ethan asked, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. The leader's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward. This isn't over, he growled. Not by a long shot. The gas station was a battlefield, littered with broken glass and debris. The unconscious biker sprawled near the pumps was a stark warning to the rest of the gang, but their leader's defiant glare held them in place. Ethan stood in the middle of the chaos, his posture unyielding, his piercing gaze daring anyone to make the next move. Inside the gas station, Michael's hands trembled as he peeked out from behind the counter. He's outnumbered, Dad, he whispered. They're going to tear him apart. Sam placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady. We have to trust him, Michael. He knows what he's doing. But what if he doesn't? Michael shot back, his voice cracking. What if he's just another man trying to be a hero and ends up dead because of it? Sam's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked far older than his years. Sometimes, son, it takes one man willing to stand up to remind the rest of us what courage looks like. Right now, he's that man. Outside, the tension thickened. The gang members exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado faltering under the weight of Ethan's calm resolve. The leader, however, wasn't ready to back down. His ego demanded a response, anything to reassert his dominance. You've made your point, soldier boy, he sneered, stepping closer, but you're alone out here. No backup, no cavalry. Just you against us. Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. You'd be surprised what one man can do when he has nothing to lose. The leader scoffed, but the subtle shift in his stance betrayed his growing uncertainty. He wasn't used to opponents who didn't flinch, who didn't play by the rules of fear and intimidation. You think you're tough because you took one of us down. This is our town now. You're just a relic, a washed-up has-been playing soldier. Ethan's expression hardened, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. I've seen men like you before. You think you can take what you want because no one's willing to stop you. But let me tell you something. Your reign ends tonight. The leader's hand twitched toward his belt, where a knife gleamed in its sheath. Big words for a dead man. Ethan's stance shifted imperceptibly, his body coiled like a spring ready to explode. You want to try your luck, I won't stop you. But know this, when I'm done, you won't be walking out of here. From the shadows near the pumps, a younger gang member named Ray hesitated. He was new to the Iron Wolves, still trying to prove himself, but the events unfolding before him made him question everything. The man standing against them wasn't just fearless, he was something else entirely, a force they hadn't reckoned with. Ray's mind raced. Was this what he wanted? To be part of a gang that preyed on the weak, destroying lives for a quick buck? He glanced at the leader, then back at Ethan, whose unwavering resolve stirred something deep within him. Boss, Ray muttered, stepping forward hesitantly. Maybe we should cut our losses. The leader snapped his head toward him, eyes blazing. You questioning me, kid? Ray shrank back, his voice faltering. No, he's not like the others. Maybe we're biting off more than we can chew. The leader advanced on him, his tone low and menacing. You don't get to think, Ray. You're here to follow orders. Got it? Ethan's voice cut through the exchange like a knife. He's right. You know. You're out of your depth. The leader turned back to Ethan, his rage boiling over. You shut your mouth or I'll shut it for you. Ethan took a slow step forward, his gaze never wavering. Do it, then. Or are you afraid to find out what happens when you try? The standoff was electric, every second stretching into an eternity. Inside the gas station, Sam and Michael watched in stunned silence, their breaths held as the scene unfolded. Michael whispered, Why isn't he backing down? Because he can't, Sam replied softly. And neither can we. A loud crash interrupted the moment as another biker, emboldened by the tension, smashed a display case near the station's entrance. Come on, boss, he shouted. Let's show him who's in charge. The leader raised a hand, silencing the group. His eyes locked onto Ethan, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. All right, he growled, drawing his knife. Let's settle this. Ethan's voice was calm, but laced with iron. I was hoping you'd say that. The air seemed to still as the gang leader and Ethan squared off, the space between them charged with raw intensity. The other bikers formed a loose circle, their rowdy energy now muted as they waited to see who would make the first move. Some were grinning in anticipation, but others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that the situation was spiraling out of control. Inside the gas station, Sam instinctively moved toward the door. Michael grabbed his arm, panic flashing in his eyes. Dad, no. You can't. He'll get himself killed. Sam turned back to his son, his face lined with determination. He's putting his life on the line for all of us, Michael. The least we can do is show him he's not alone. Back outside, the leader slowly circled Ethan, his knife catching the glint of the gas station lights. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he sneered. But guts won't save you. Ethan stood his ground, calm and immovable. Neither will bravado. You want to prove something, let's get this over with. The leader lunged suddenly, his knife slashing through the air in a vicious arc. Ethan sidestepped effortlessly, his years of training allowing him to predict the move before it even happened. As the leader stumbled forward, Ethan delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs, sending him reeling. The crowd of bikers erupted in shouts and curses, some edging closer as though ready to jump in. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. Stay back. This is between me and him. The authority in his tone froze them in their tracks, the weight of his presence more commanding than any weapon. Even the leader, coughing and clutching his side, hesitated before straightening up, his face twisted in anger. Oh, you think you're tough, the leader spat, blood staining the corner of his mouth. Let's see how tough you are against all of us. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his voice steady. That's your plan. Hide behind your gang because you can't handle me on your own. The word struck a nerve, and the leader's face flushed with fury. You're dead, old man. He charged again, this time feinting to the left before aiming a sharp thrust at Ethan's midsection, but Ethan was ready. He grabbed the leader's wrist, twisting it with brutal efficiency until the knife clattered to the ground. A split second later, Ethan swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the pavement. The leader groaned, lying sprawled on the ground as Ethan stepped over him, his shadow looming. This is your last chance, Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a final warning. Call off your men and walk away. Don't make me do what I don't want to. But before the leader could respond, a sudden roar of engines broke the tension. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as several vehicles approached. For a moment, no one moved. Uncertainty rippling through the gang as the newcomers came into view. A convoy of trucks and cars pulled into the lot, their occupants spilling out with grim determination. Sam was at the forefront, shotgun in hand, flanked by a group of locals who had answered his call, farmers, mechanics, and small business owners, ordinary people who had endured enough. They carried bats, wrenches, and tools, their faces hardened with resolve. The bikers turned toward the new arrivals, their earlier bravado visibly shaken. The odds had just shifted dramatically, and they knew it. One of the gang members, A wiry man with a jagged scar across his cheek stepped forward, his voice tinged with desperation. "Boss, we should go. This ain't worth it." The leader struggled to his feet, glaring at his man. "Shut up, we're not backing down." Ethan's voice cut through the noise, calm but unyielding. "Look around. This isn't just about me anymore. These people are done being afraid of you." The leader glanced at the gathering crowd, his confidence faltering. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the look in their eyes. They weren't backing down, not this time. He clenched his fists, his pride warring with the growing realization that he was outmatched. Sam stepped forward, his voice carrying across the lot. "This is your last chance. Pack up and leave, or we'll make sure you regret staying." For a long moment, the leader said nothing, his breathing ragged. Finally, he spat on the ground, his voice low and venomous. "You've got guts, old man, but this ain't over." He turned to his men, barking orders. "Let's go." The bikers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances, but as the locals closed ranks, their decision was made for them. One by one, they mounted their bikes, their engines growling as they prepared to leave. As the convoy of bikers roared away into the night, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd. The tension that had gripped the gas station began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of quiet triumph. Ethan stood silently, watching the tail lights fade into the distance. His shoulders relaxed, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the lot for any lingering threats. Sam approached him, extending a hand. "You didn't have to do this, but you did. Thank you." Ethan shook his hand firmly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Sometimes you've got to stand up, no matter the odds." The quiet aftermath of the confrontation settled over the gas station like a heavy mist. Though the bikers had gone, their presence lingered in the tense shoulders of the locals and the nervous murmurs that passed among them. Sam stood beside Ethan, their shared silence a testament to the gravity of what had just occurred. Inside the gas station, Michael leaned against the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to process what had happened. He had never seen his father like this, calm, resolute, and unflinching in the face of danger. It was as if the years of quiet struggle on the farm had forged an iron resolve within Sam that Michael had never truly understood until now. "Dad," Michael began, his voice breaking slightly, "how did you know they'd back down?" Sam turned to him, his expression softening. "I didn't, son, but I knew we couldn't let them run over us anymore. Sometimes you don't get guarantees, you just have to act." Michael nodded slowly, his respect for his father deepening. "I didn't think anyone would show up when you called." Sam smiled faintly, his gaze shifting to the group of locals who still lingered outside. "People will surprise you, Michael. When they see someone willing to stand up, they find the courage to stand with them." Meanwhile, Ethan leaned against the side of the building, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting the bikers to return. Sam joined him, holding out a bottle of water. "You good?" Ethan took the bottle with a nod. "I'm fine. Been in worse situations." Sam chuckled lightly. "I don't doubt that. But tonight, you gave this town something we haven't had in a long time, Hope." Ethan glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Hope doesn't mean much if they come back." Sam's face hardened. "Then we'll be ready. We've got more fight in us than they think." Ethan's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. "You're tougher than you look, Sam." As the crowd began to disperse, a few people stopped to thank Ethan personally. A young mechanic named Luke, his hands still greasy from a day's work, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Carter," Luke said, his voice filled with awe. "What you did out there, I've never seen anything like it." Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't just me. Everyone here played a part. That's what it takes, standing together." Luke nodded earnestly. "If they come back, I'll be ready." Ethan placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. "Good. But remember, bravery doesn't mean looking for a fight. It means standing up when the fight comes to you." Inside, Sarah, the gas station cashier, approached Sam with a cup of coffee. "It's on the house," she said softly, her hands trembling as she set it down on the counter. "Thank you for everything." Sam gave her a kind smile. "You didn't have to do that, Sarah." Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, I did. You don't know what it's been like, living in fear every day. What you and Ethan did tonight, it changed things." Sam reached across the counter, taking her hand in his. "Oh, you're stronger than you think, Sarah. Don't forget that." As the night deepened, the gas station grew quieter. Ethan, Sam, and Michael sat together at one of the outdoor tables, the faint hum of crickets filling the air. For the first time in hours, there was a sense of peace. "You never did tell me," Sam said, breaking the silence. "Why were you at the gas station tonight, Ethan?" Ethan took a long sip from his water bottle, his gaze distant. "I was just passing through, looking for something." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Something." Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "A reason to keep going. A place that still feels worth fighting for." Sam nodded slowly, understanding more than Ethan had intended to reveal. "You found it here tonight. Whether you stay or move on, you've made a difference." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out into the darkness, his mind wrestling with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he said, "Sometimes a fight reminds you who you are." Michael, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "You're not just a fighter, Ethan. You're a protector. There's a difference." Ethan glanced at him, surprised by the insight. "You're smarter than you let on, kid." Michael smiled sheepishly, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all night. "I learned from the best." As midnight approached, the last of the locals headed home, leaving the gas station in peaceful silence. Sam stood and stretched, his back aching from the night's events. "We should get going too," he said, turning to Ethan. "But if you ever need a place to rest, you've got one here." Ethan met his gaze, a flicker of gratitude crossing his face. "I'll keep that in mind." Sam nodded, clapping him on the shoulder before heading to his truck. Michael followed, glancing back at Ethan one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice heavy with sincerity. Ethan gave him a brief nod, watching as the truck pulled out of the lot and disappeared into the night. The gas station was empty now, save for Ethan. He leaned back against the table, staring up at the stars. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of purpose. The calm that had settled over the gas station proved to be fleeting. As the early hours of morning crept in, the distant growl of motorcycle engines shattered the stillness. Ethan, still seated outside, instinctively tensed, his hand drifting toward the handle of the knife strapped to his belt. His sharp ears picked up the unmistakable sound of multiple bikes, a pack, not just a few stragglers. From the direction of the highway, headlights pierced the darkness, casting long shadows over the station. One by one, the bikers rolled in, their engines roaring like wild beasts. This wasn't the same small group from earlier. There were at least 10 of them now, each wearing the same leather jackets with the patch of a snarling wolf stitched on the back. Ethan's jaw tightened as he rose to his feet. His instincts screamed that this was retaliation, a show of force from a group unwilling to let their earlier humiliation go unanswered. The leader of the pack dismounted first, his boots hitting the pavement with a deliberate thud. He was taller and broader than any of the others, his heavily tattooed arms glistening with sweat under the station's dim lights. A large scar carved across his left cheek gave him a menacing look, his narrowed eyes locking onto Ethan with predatory intent. "So, you're the cowboy who thought he could humiliate my boys?" the leader sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Name's Kane, and I don't take kindly to people messin' with my crew." Ethan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his posture calm but ready. "Your boys messed with the wrong man," he replied evenly, "and now you're here to make the same mistake." Kane barked out a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but guts won't save you tonight." He gestured to his crew, who began spreading out in a semicircle around Ethan. The growl of their engines persisted, the sound amplifying the tension. Ethan's sharp eyes scanned his surroundings, cataloging every detail. He counted the bikers, noted their positions, and spotted the weapons some of them carried: chains, knives, and a few with pistols tucked into their belts. His mind worked quickly, assessing options and formulating a plan. But then something unexpected happened. A familiar pickup truck roared into view, its headlights slicing through the darkness like a beacon. Sam's truck skidded to a stop near the gas station's entrance, and the older man climbed out, his expression set in stone. Michael followed close behind, stepping out of the passenger side. Though nervous, he clutched a heavy wrench in his hand, his resolve clear. "We couldn't leave you alone," he said firmly, joining Ethan. Ethan's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Told you this wasn't your fight." Sam stepped up beside him, his gaze fixed on Kane. "You helped us earlier, Ethan. Now it's our turn." Kane's smirk faltered as he watched the unlikely trio stand together. "You're out of your leagues, old man," he growled, gesturing to his crew. "This isn't a farm or a fairground. This is war." Sam met his gaze, unflinching. "You think I don't know what war looks like? I've seen it in different forms my whole life. And I've learned one thing: you don't back down when bullies come calling." The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Kane's crew began advancing, their boots crunching against the gravel. The faint sound of a siren in the distance briefly pierced the night, but it was still far away, leaving no hope for immediate help. Ethan glanced at Sam and Michael. "If you're staying, you follow my lead." "I understand." Sam nodded without hesitation, and even Michael, despite his evident fear, squared his shoulders in agreement. Kane's voice broke through the silence. "Last chance to walk away, cowboy." Ethan stepped forward, his gaze locked on Kane's. "Not a chance." With that, the standoff erupted into chaos. The first biker charged at Ethan, swinging a chain wildly. Ethan sidestepped with practiced ease, grabbing the chain mid-swing and yanking it hard enough to throw the man off balance. A swift punch to the jaw sent the biker sprawling to the ground. Meanwhile, Sam swung a wooden plank he'd grabbed from the back of his truck, catching another biker in the ribs. The man staggered back, cursing, but Sam didn't relent, driving him away from Michael. Michael, clutching his wrench, found himself face to face with a younger biker. Fear flickered in his eyes, but he remembered Ethan's earlier words. Bravery doesn't mean looking for a fight. When the biker lunged, Michael ducked and swung the wrench upward, hitting the man's arm and forcing him to drop his knife. Ethan moved with precision and purpose, taking down one opponent after another. His movements were fluid, his strikes calculated. Years of training and experience shone through as he outmaneuvered his enemies, turning their own strength against them. Kane, watching from the sidelines, clenched his fists in frustration. His crew was faltering, their confidence unraveling in the face of Ethan's skill and the unexpected resistance from Sam and Michael. But the fight was far from over. Kane finally stepped into the fray, pulling a large knife from his belt. He advanced on Ethan, his intentions clear. "For you think you're some kind of hero," Kane snarled, slashing the blade through the air. "You're just a washed-up has-been." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he waited, his muscles coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Kane lunged, and the fight reached its boiling point. Kane lunged forward with the knife, its blade glinting under the harsh lights of the gas station. He was quick, his movements sharp and aggressive, but Ethan was quicker. He sidestepped the attack with the grace of a seasoned fighter, grabbing Kane's wrist mid-swing and twisting it with calculated force. The knife clattered to the ground, and Kane let out a growl of frustration as Ethan shoved him backward. "How you've got moves, I'll give you that," Kane spat, shaking out his wrist. "But skill alone won't save you." Ethan remained silent, his emerald green eyes locked on Kane, reading every twitch, every muscle movement. The years of battle-hardened experience in the military had taught him to anticipate an opponent's next move, to find the cracks in their facade. Kane, for all his bravado, was rattled, and Ethan could see it. Around them, the gas station remained a battleground. Sam was holding his own against a wiry biker who had managed to corner him near the pumps. Using the length of the wooden plank as both a shield and a weapon, Sam deflected every wild swing the man threw his way. The older farmer's strength and resolve were a stark contrast to his opponent's frantic aggression. Michael, on the other hand, was struggling. Though he had fended off one attacker, another biker had pinned him against a car. The younger man's face was pale, his breathing ragged as he tried to wrestle free. Ethan caught sight of him out of the corner of his eye, and something flickered across his face. Concern, but not panic. Kane saw the momentary distraction and took advantage. He surged forward, landing a heavy blow to Ethan's midsection. The impact forced a grunt from Ethan as he staggered back, but he quickly recovered, his stance firm once more. "You care about them," Kane sneered, gesturing towards Sam and Michael. "That's your weakness." Ethan straightened, his expression hardening. "You don't know the first thing about strength." In one fluid motion, Ethan swept his leg across the ground, catching Kane off balance and sending him sprawling. As Kane hit the pavement, Ethan closed the distance, planting a boot firmly on the biker leader's chest. The tables had turned, and the once dominant Kane was now at Ethan's mercy. The sounds of the surrounding fight seemed to fade as the two men stared each other down. Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice low and steady. Strength isn't about intimidation or power. It's about protecting the people who matter. And right now, you're the biggest threat here. Before Ethan could decide his next move, a sudden shout drew his attention. One of the bikers had grabbed a fuel nozzle and was holding it like a weapon, threatening to ignite it with a lighter. The man's wild eyes darted between Ethan, Kane, and the gas pumps. "Back off!" the biker yelled, his hand trembling. "Or I blow this whole place sky high!" The tension in the air thickened as everyone froze. Sam stopped mid-swing, his opponent taking the opportunity to back away. Michael, still struggling against the biker pinning him, looked toward the commotion with wide eyes. Ethan's mind raced. The man with the lighter was desperate, unpredictable, a dangerous combination. If he made the wrong move, the entire gas station could go up in flames. Yet he couldn't let the threat stand. Kane, sensing an opportunity, let out a harsh laugh from his position on the ground. "What now, cowboy? You gonna risk everyone's lives for your hero act?" Ethan ignored him, his focus solely on the man with the lighter. "Put it down," he said evenly, his tone commanding but calm. "You don't want to do this." The biker's hand wavered, his grip on the nozzle tightening. "You don't know what I want," he snapped. "You don't know what it's like to have nothing, to be nothing." Ethan took a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "You think blowing this place up will change that? It won't. You'll just take more away, from yourself, from everyone here. I've seen men do things they can't take back. Don't be one of them." The biker hesitated, his resolve faltering under Ethan's steady gaze. For a moment, it seemed like he might lower the lighter, but then Kane barked out an order. "Don't listen to him. Show him we mean business." The command snapped the biker out of his hesitation, and he flicked the lighter on. The small flame danced precariously close to the fuel nozzle. Ethan reacted instantly. In one swift motion, he grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it with pinpoint accuracy. The rock struck the man's hand, knocking the lighter to the pavement. A collective gasp rippled through the group as the flame extinguished harmlessly. Ethan wasted no time. He closed the distance in seconds, disarming the biker and pinning him to the ground. The fuel nozzle clattered away, out of reach. The remaining bikers, already shaken by Ethan's dominance and the failed threat, began retreating one by one. Sam and Michael stepped forward, their presence reinforcing Ethan's silent warning. Enough was enough. Kane, still trapped under Ethan's boot, glared up at him. "This isn't over," he spat, though his bravado was hollow now. "It is for you," Ethan replied, his voice cold. He stepped back, allowing Kane to scramble to his feet. "Tell your crew to leave. Don't come back." Ain hesitated, his pride warring with self-preservation. But as he looked around, at his injured crew, at the determination in Ethan's eyes, he realized he had no choice. With a growl of frustration, he signaled for his men to retreat. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared away into the night, Ethan turned to Sam and Michael. "You both okay?" Sam nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. Michael managed a shaky smile. "I think I'll stick to quieter nights from now on." Ethan allowed himself a brief smirk before glancing toward the horizon. The climax was near, but the fight wasn't truly over. Something told him Kane wouldn't give up so easily. The sound of the motorcycles had barely faded into the distance when the faint rumble of engines returned. Ethan's sharp instincts kicked in as he turned his gaze toward the road. The flickering headlights of more bikes appeared on the horizon, heading straight for the gas station. This wasn't over. Not yet. Sam and Michael exchanged uneasy glances, the fleeting relief they had felt moments ago replaced by growing tension. Ethan's jaw tightened, his mind already working through strategies. Kane and his crew had regrouped, and they were coming back for one final confrontation. "Sam, get inside," Ethan ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Lock the doors and keep low. Michael, help him. Stay out of sight." "What about you?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with worry. Ethan's eyes didn't waver from the approaching lights. "I'll handle it." Michael hesitated, but saw the resolve in Ethan's expression. He gave a quick nod and helped Sam toward the gas station's entrance. The older man muttered under his breath about not wanting to leave Ethan alone, but he didn't argue further. As the new group of bikers pulled into the lot, Ethan positioned himself at the center, standing tall and unmoving. His presence was commanding, his silhouette illuminated by the overhead lights. This wasn't just about strength, it was about control, about sending a message before the fight even began. The bikers dismounted, their numbers doubling the original group. Kane emerged from the pack, his face twisted in anger and humiliation. He carried a chain in one hand, its heavy link scraping against the pavement as he approached. "You think you can humiliate me and walk away?" Kane snarled, his voice echoing in the still night. "How you don't know who you're dealing with?" Ethan stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You're right," he said, his tone steady. "I don't know you, but I know your type. You think fear is power. You think numbers make you strong. Let me show you what real strength looks like." Kane's sneer faltered for a split second before he raised the chain, swinging it in a threatening arc. "You're outnumbered, veteran. Let's see how tough you really are." The fight erupted like a storm. Kane's men surged forward, but Ethan was ready. He moved with precision, his military training evident in every calculated step and strike. The first biker to reach him was met with a sharp jab to the solar plexus, followed by a swift elbow to the temple. The man crumpled to the ground, out cold. Another attacker came at Ethan with a crowbar, swinging wildly. Ethan ducked under the blow, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted it sharply, forcing him to drop the weapon. A well-placed kick sent the biker sprawling. Inside the gas station, Sam and Michael watched through the windows, their faces pale with concern. "We can't just leave him out there," Michael said, his voice urgent. Sam placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "He told us to stay put, and for good reason. That man's been through more battles than we can imagine. He knows what he's doing." Michael clenched his fists, frustration warring with respect. He knew Sam was right, but that didn't make it any easier to watch. Outside, the fight intensified. Kane's men were relentless, but so was Ethan. He used their numbers against them, maneuvering to keep them clustered and off balance. Every punch, every kick was precise, designed to incapacitate without wasting energy. Kane hung back, his chain swinging menacingly as he waited for an opening. When he finally lunged, it was with all the fury of a cornered predator. The chain whistled through the air, aimed directly at Ethan's head. Ethan ducked, the chain grazing his shoulder. He seized the opportunity to close the distance, grabbing the chain and yanking it hard. Kane stumbled forward, caught off guard, and Ethan delivered a powerful uppercut that sent him reeling. The remaining bikers hesitated, their confidence waning as they saw their leader struggle. Ethan turned to face them, his chest heaving but his stance unyielding. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice carrying across the lot. "Take your bikes and go. Don't come back." For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the bikers began retreating. They mounted their motorcycles, their faces a mix of anger and shame. The roar of engines filled the air as they sped off into the night, leaving Kane behind. Kane staggered to his feet, his lip bleeding and his chain forgotten on the ground. He glared at Ethan, his pride in tatters. "You think this is over?" he spat. Ethan cut him off. "It is over. You lost. And if you try anything like this again, you'll lose even more." Kane's shoulders slumped, the fight finally draining out of him. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows without another word. As the dust settled, Sam and Michael emerged cautiously from the gas station. They approached Ethan, their faces etched with gratitude and relief. "You all right?" Sam asked, his voice rough with emotion. Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've had worse." Michael looked at the scattered remnants of the fight, then back at Ethan. "You didn't just protect us tonight. You stood up for everyone they've been terrorizing." Ethan met his gaze, his expression softening. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person to say no more." Three men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the night settling over them. In the distance, the first light of dawn began to break, casting a soft glow over the gas station. It was a new day, and for Ethan, Sam, and Michael, it felt like a new beginning. The first rays of dawn spread across the quiet gas station, bathing the aftermath of the confrontation in a golden glow. The lot was scattered with broken chains, discarded weapons, and the faint tire marks left by the retreating bikers. Ethan stood still, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon to ensure no threats lingered. Sam and Michael moved closer, their steps hesitant but filled with a sense of awe. It was the first time either of them had truly seen the depth of Ethan's resolve and the weight of his experience. "Ethan," Sam began, his voice rough with gratitude, "I don't even know where to start. What you did tonight," he trailed off, shaking his head as if words could never be enough. "You saved our lives." Ethan turned to Sam, his expression softened by the dawning light. "I didn't just do it for you. I did it because bullies like them think they can walk over anyone. Sometimes someone has to show them they're wrong." Michael nodded, his admiration for Ethan plain on his face. "I didn't think we'd make it out of this. But you turned the tables on them, showed them what real strength looks like." Sam gestured toward the gas station, where the windows still bore the smudges of the frantic moments earlier in the night. "This place has been my livelihood for decades," he said. "I built it with my own 2 hands after my wife passed. It's not just a gas station, it's my home. And now, thanks to you, it still stands." Ethan gave a small, understanding nod. "Sometimes the places we fight to protect are more than just walls and roofs. They're memories, legacies. That's why we can't let people like Kane take them away." As the 3 men spoke, the early risers of the town began to trickle in. Farmers in pickup trucks and commuters heading out for the day's work stopped at the gas station, their faces showing curiosity at the sight of the aftermath. Word of what had happened spread quickly, carried by the locals who had seen the commotion earlier in the night. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. Some shook hands with Ethan, expressing their gratitude for standing up to the bikers. Others simply stood in awe, knowing that they owed their newfound sense of safety to a man who had once lived among them quietly, unassuming but ever watchful. One woman, Mary Ann, whose family owned the diner across the road, approached Ethan with tears in her eyes. "They've been threatening me for weeks," she admitted. "I was too scared to say anything, but now they're gone." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "This town isn't a place for fear. Not anymore." Sam stepped forward, his gruff demeanor momentarily replaced by a rare smile. "You hear that, Mary Ann? He's right. We've got each other. That's what matters." As the morning wore on, Ethan began to feel the weight of the night's events. He excused himself from the crowd and walked to a small hill overlooking the station. The view was serene, the town stretching out beneath the soft glow of the morning sun. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, a feeling that perhaps his return had meaning. Michael joined him after a few minutes, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing one to Ethan. Ethan accepted it with a nod of thanks. They stood in silence for a while, the breeze carrying the faint sounds of the town below. "You ever think about settling down here?" Michael asked eventually. "The town could use someone like you, we all could." Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so long moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. But after last night, maybe it's time to stop running." Michael smiled, sensing the hint of hope in Ethan's words. "Well, if you ever decide to stay, I'd be proud to call you a neighbor. And I'm sure Sam feels the same." Ethan chuckled softly, the sound carrying a hint of relief. "Thanks, Michael. I'll think about it." As the sun climbed higher, the crowd at the gas station began to disperse. Life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after such a night. But there was a newfound energy in the air, a collective sense of unity that hadn't been there before. Sam approached Ethan one last time before he left. "This town owes you a debt we can't repay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But if there's ever anything you need, you just let us know." Ethan clasped Sam's hand firmly. "I didn't do this for repayment. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Take care of yourself, Sam, and take care of this place." As Ethan walked to his truck, he paused to take one last look at the gas station. The neon sign flickered in the daylight, a small but persistent reminder that this place, and the people who lived here, had endured. He climbed into his truck and started the engine, the rumble of the vehicle echoing in the stillness of the morning. Driving away, Ethan knew that his journey wasn't over. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had made a difference. And maybe, just maybe, he had found a place worth returning to. This story of courage and resilience is just one of many tales we share on this channel. If Ethan's stand inspired you, don't miss out on our next story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you're ready for more, click on one of the videos on your screen right now. You won't regret it. Thanks for watching.